let's go back then to the whole idea of what do we want to see when we're gathering information for our executive director to give him or her feedback. And the first thing that is most common is that we create a series of surveys. Each of those surveys should be pretty short. They're usually 5 to 10 questions long. If you get them too long, people then don't finish them, or they look at how long it's going to take them and they don't even start them. So we want to use an electronic tool like SurveyMonkey. SurveyMonkey is my personal favorite. There is a free version of SurveyMonkey. There are lots of other different tools as well. And I don't own shares in the company. It's just my preferred tool in my practice because I do a fair amount of survey work on behalf of my nonprofit clients. So choose one that works for you. They almost all have a free version. SurveyMonkey's free version allows you to do an unlimited number of surveys, but you're restricted to how many questions that you can ask. So as of the filming of this video, I think it's 10 questions per survey that you can ask. You want to create one survey for each stakeholder group. So the board should have a survey, your direct reports and employees should have a survey, your externals should have a survey, because the questions you ask across those surveys will in fact be substantially different. So you want to ask questions that are appropriate for the group in the survey that you're distributing, and you cannot ask the same 10 questions of everybody, or a lot of questions will not apply, and you'll get a bunch of NAs and you'll have people not completing the survey, and then all of your work will have gone for naught. Make sure that if you have resources to be able to devote to this, that you seek some external advice or support in creating the initial drafts of the survey. Then after that, you can kind of use them on autopilot. You can tweak them and take some questions off and add some questions year over year. But there's people like me in every community and jurisdiction who will do survey support and assist you in the survey design. It's a routine part of my business. I love doing it because it lets the organization start off on the right foot, and then they can maintain it on their own. So it's a one-time cost that actually gets them a good quality product that they can tweak and change and adjust a little bit over time. I would also encourage you to draft a master list of somewhere between 25 and 40 questions or 50 questions. And the reason that that is helpful is that you can then change your questions based on who the group is that you're surveying, and also you can change them year over year. Let me give you an example of why we want to change questions. We want to have some core questions that are the same, and that's fine because it helps us do comparisons. But with executive director surveys, unlike staff satisfaction surveys, we're really looking for where are we at this year, as opposed to where were we at last year compared to this year. Staff stat surveys, we want to have year over year comparison. Executive director, we mainly want to know how's this person doing right now, a snapshot of a point in time. If your organization last year was stable, smooth sailing, not a lot going on, you probably didn't ask any questions on your surveys about change or change management. This year, let's suppose you've added 2 new programs, closed a program, added this, subtracted that, moved to a new building. There's been lots of change. You absolutely want to ask 1 or 2 questions about how did your executive director lead the change management process? How did they do with that? Change management is one of the thorniest areas of nonprofit life. Very many people don't do a great job of it, and we need to have senior managers who understand the process of change management so they can teach it to others and support the organization as it learns, evolves, changes over time. So we're going to ask a different question this year, or questions this year, than we asked last year, and that's absolutely fine and perfectly okay. So this master list of questions, we can just brainstorm it. If you want a sample master list of questions, send me an email, Paula MacLean at learningforleaders.ca. I fire you off a sample list of questions that you can add to, subtract from. So this allows us to be time efficient. The committee next year, when they're doing the executive director's performance appraisal, can look at that list of questions and say question 5, question 9, question 22, question, right? And just go down the list and say that's the list we'd like to use. Now, I want you to engage your executive director in this. This should not be an anxiety-provoking process or time for your ED. So this is a classic opportunity right now to say, what are the questions you think we should ask? If you could get some feedback in a particular area, what would it be? What questions would be on your list of things that we should ask and answer? It should not be secretive. It should be transparent. It should be collegial. It should be a partnership. It should be a hand-in-glove process. to design the performance appraisal process that you will use with your executive director. Engage her or him in this process. So we also want the executive director to give us lists of who should be surveyed. We don't know as board members that who should be on that list. So here's the list of all of the direct reports. So these are the 5 people that report to me. Here's the list of the other 15 people inside the organization who play a leadership role but don't report to me directly. Here are the list of our funders and our outside, and here's our major donors, 2 or 3 major donors. Here are the people that I sit on committees with. So we want to have names and contact information. Now, if your executive director gives you, I don't know, depends on the side of your organization, 10, 15, 20, or 50 names, the board committee is then going to choose who actually receives the survey. In some cases, it will be all 5 direct reports. Probably not all 15 other people who are in a leadership role, maybe 3 or 4 of those people. So we're going to choose those sometimes at random. A board member once just look at the list, go down, close their eyes, and stop their finger every so many, and just picked that way, which I think is probably about as good as any, making the assumption that all those people know the executive director well enough and have enough contact to have a valid opinion about the executive director's ability to do the job well. So what we're doing here then is choosing the people that the executive director has provided us, but not choosing all of them. So this makes it a manageable task. Usually 3, 4, 5 people on any given stakeholder group is sufficient. So 5 people who are consumers of service, 5 people who are in leadership roles. The numbers will vary largely based on the size of your organization and how deep you want to go. Now we then need to draft an invitation email. Again, if you need a sample of that draft, by all means send me an email and I will fire you off a copy of the draft that I often encourage boards to use. But again, this is just a sample. This is something you can work from. You need to change it to fit your organization. And we adapt that email for different participants. We need to make sure that we send this email out and that it's clear in the email that the executive director has participated in this, is in agreement with it, that this is a developmental process, that it's positive, that we're not on a witch hunt, that the executive director is not in trouble and the board is searching for dirt. That is really a fear-provoking time for people who are participating. When my board did my 2nd annual performance appraisal when I was an executive director, I got a call from one of our senior managers late one night. He was a night owl, I was not. And he sent me a note and he said, "Paula, are you in trouble with the board?" And I said, "Not that I know of, John. What's up?" And he said, "Well, Peter, our board chair, had been calling all of the managers on the management team." I think we had about 11 people on our management team. All of them had gotten a call from Peter who was asking them questions at random. And we had a written process. We had taken time to build the process, but for whatever reason, our board chair at that point in time decided he had his own idea of how we should go about this. And the staff group, a group of managers who reported to me, they clammed up. We had a wonderful working relationship. We had a great way of communicating. And I was forever glad that John gave me a call, because next morning I got on the phone and I talked to Peter and I said, "Why aren't you using the process?" And he said, "Oh, I forgot about the process." "Oh yeah." And he said, "That's why your managers wouldn't talk to me." And I said, "Yeah, that would be why the managers wouldn't talk to you, but you know what? You have a responsibility to follow your own rules." And so I was polite and respectful. I was not as blunt as I just was right now, but the reality was I was a little provoked and a little bit annoyed that we'd spent several months working out a process which then the new incoming board chair had conveniently ignored. So about 3-4 days later, he got the whole thing back on track. The committee was back on track, and I got a note of apology and a nice little box of fancy chocolates that said, "Oops, we goofed, and sorry, and thanks for drawing it to our attention." So this can be a very, very difficult time for executive directors who are a little bit worried about their board volunteers' ability to follow the rules. So make sure that when you're going through this process that you have the right rules in place and that you invite your executive director to the table, and that when you're communicating outside and sending that email that kicks off the the 360-degree performance appraisal process, that you're reassuring the participants in this process that we have written guidelines and we're following those guidelines, and this will be in a positive and well-intended kind of part of organizational accountability and the trust but verify realm. Making sure then we choose someone who does the data analysis, who actually summarizes that information. If you have a numbers geek, if you have somebody who writes well, if you have somebody who has a fair amount of time to be able to do this, is a great choice of someone on the board to summarize this. We want to make sure that we are clear on who gets to see the detailed information. Normally, the person who's doing the summary and the chair of the board are the only two people who have access to the detailed individual comments and numerical responses on the actual SurveyMonkey file that's carried online. We want to limit that because it leaves a whole bunch of leaks for information. So we don't want every board member, for example, to have access to each individual account, and it leaves problems around confidentiality and anonymity. So if there's a critical comment and we have everybody looking at it, it can take on a life of its own. I wonder who it was that said that, and I wonder if that issue is really, like, I wonder if there's other people who feel the same way. So you want this to be fairly defined, fairly controlled to one or two people who have access to all of the detail on that file. Everyone sees the summary, including the executive director. Not everyone will see all of the detail that will come forward. One of the things that happens when we send the email out is that some people just decline to participate, but they don't tell us. And if you only have 3 or 4 people who you've invited to participate, you want to know whether or not some people will not respond. So the email that you send out should actually say, if you are declining to participate, unable, don't have the time, please let us know by response to this email, and we will pick someone else on our list, so that they understand it's okay not to participate. It's also okay for them to tell you, so that you can have a plan B, and you'll choose somebody else off the longer list and send them an email a day or 2 after everybody else has gotten that information. Give about 10 business days to be able to respond to the email. Send a couple of reminder notices and just say, if you haven't already responded to the survey, the deadline is, please, and always embed the link back to the survey in every reminder email that you send out. It will increase the number of people who are likely going to respond by just saying, oh, what the heck, I'll just punch the link. Remind people in the email that this will only take them 3 minutes to complete or 4 minutes to complete, which is typically how long it takes to complete 10 questions. They are pretty quick. So minimize the amount of effort that people have to do, so that will increase your return rate on your surveys. Now you need to also decide how your executive director will participate and do their own self-evaluation. What I'd encourage you to do is to take a look at the questions you asked in all of your surveys and choose questions that are appropriate for your executive director to also answer. This allows us to compare apples and apples. You do not want to pick a whole nother set of questions that are completely different to what all the rest of the surveys are asking. So you want to line that up. You want to make sure that we do an executive director's job description review. Sometimes we'll find the executive director hasn't looked at their job description for years and years and years. Now's a great time to do that and revise it, or start with a brand new one. So you can assign that as a task to your ED and say, revise your job description, bring the revision recommendations forward as part of your self-evaluation, or write a whole brand new draft executive director performance or executive director job description for consideration by the board as part of the performance appraisal process. So if there has been a previous performance appraisal, there are likely goals coming from that performance appraisal. So you would normally ask your executive director to provide an update on the things that he or she has accomplished. Don't be surprised if some of the goals might have fallen into the filed and forgotten, the circular filing cabinet. That's not unusual. All you need to do is come back to them and say, why wasn't it attended to? This is an accountability process, remember, but sometimes the goal wasn't relevant. One year when I had a performance appraisal, I had a super keen board chair. He wrote my goals for me. And I didn't have the heart to say, some of these are not relevant. These are not those are not my goals. So don't write your goals for your executive director, or they might end up in the circular filing cabinet. So if there's some goals that weren't relevant, some goals that just the executive director didn't have time for, but have a conversation around that, because if those goals are relevant and they're important and they didn't get done, then make sure that you're holding your executive director accountable for not attending to those things. When you do your numerical summary and your comment summary from your SurveyMonkey files, it's important we wrap those up in a summary document. And watch safeguard confidentiality here, because if you just caption the comments exactly as they've been written, they sometimes include people's names, they'll sometimes include a particular writing style or use of language, or it'll tell a story, and you know exactly who wrote that comment. You need to sterilize those so that they become non-named, so that they become more general, so that you in fact have something that you can use, but at the same token something that's not attributable to a particular person, because otherwise the whole area of being anonymous and confidential becomes problematic. The summary then should include a few things. First of all, and this is my personal favorite of how we summarize, strengths that are identified from the survey, areas of achievement and successes, and then areas for future development or improvement. So we're essentially categorizing or grouping things in the summary that make it easy to find. If you want to use the word themes around those, that's perfectly fine as well. Then the committee meets in camera to review the summary and make any revisions that might be necessary. So this is a check on the person who has volunteered, usually a board member who has volunteered to actually do the summary, so we don't send this off without having other eyes on it as well. And then we forward the revised summary and recommendations, if there are recommendations, to the board, and that goes to the board as a whole, and we set an agenda item for an upcoming meeting. Now I want to remind you that the committee chair has a responsibility to both the board as well as to the executive director for communicating where they are in this process. One of the most mind-bending and stressful times for an executive director is to not know what the board is doing. So very easy to fire off an email, a text, a phone call, and just say, I just wanted to bring you up to speed. We're reviewing at tonight's meeting the summary, and then that'll go forward to the board, and we'll talk about it at our March meeting, and then we should have a decision from the board to approve the actual summary document, and we'll meet with you. That's all that needs to happen. They don't need to know the details of what the results are. They just need to know that we're moving along in the process that has been written in the governance policies, and that everything is well. Now I'm going to talk about the gnarly bits when everything isn't well in the next lesson. So sometimes that actually happens. So we then have a board meeting where the summary document is reviewed, and we can usually a motion to approve the summary and then forward to the executive director for review. Now in actual practice, this point and the point on the earlier slide are sometimes reversed. The committee meets, sits down with the executive director and reviews the draft summary, and then you work on goals together, and then that document goes forward to the board. Remember, your committee is often the executive committee, so that's usually a pretty appropriate process. So judge from your own organization's history and practices what way you would like to do this. If you ask me as an executive director, which I preferred, sooner is better than later for most EDs. I liked the feedback that I always got from my board. It wasn't always positive, but I liked receiving it. So I liked committee coming to me, us sitting down, having a lively conversation about what is this, what do we need to do, what I need to improve on, and then next step, take it to the board as a whole, together with the goals that we worked out together. So important then that the executive director get an opportunity to talk face-to-face with the entire board with the survey in front of them. The board can meet in camera first if you'd like to, but sometimes the in-camera meeting at that stage is not all that important, and the executive director and the board have a conversation about strengths, accomplishments, potential areas for development, professional development goals. Those kinds of things can be a part of that conversation. And remember, as a final step, sign off on this, date the actual document, and fire it off to the Executive Director of Personnel file. By the way, funny little story, I was just working with a nonprofit board. They were doing their board policy on performance appraisal of their ED. They have a very positive and happy working relationship, and at the end of this process that I was facilitating with them, it occurred to them that their Executive Director, who's been in her job, I think, for 5 or 6 years, does not have a personnel file. So that was kind of a funny ending to this, is that, well, yeah, for sure we'll make sure it gets signed, but it has no place to go. So that was kind of a little note by the chair of the board to make sure that a personnel file was set up. All right, that brings us to the end of this lesson, and please jump forward to the next lesson, which is the gnarly bits.